The last time, brothers and sisters, we were discussing the question of authorship of the Gospel of Mark. And what we said about the authorship was that this bishop in a city called Hierapolis in 130 CE, named Papias, was that person who is the originator of the fact that the gospel was authored in a way by Mark. Papias had said that he had heard from the presbyter that Mark was the hermeneusis or interpreter of Peter, who wrote down accurately without missing anything out, though he did not write in order all of the things that Peter said that Jesus said and did. And so Papias is at the background of the authorship of the Gospel of Mark. And so the question is, who is this Mark? There are 8 mentions of Mark or John Mark in the New Testament, and out of these 8, there are 3 which call Mark John Mark, and all the 3 are in the Acts of the Apostles. It is only one of those in the Acts of the Apostles, namely Acts 15:39, where John Mark is not used, where Barnabas took Mark with him, we are told. In Colossians, Mark is regarded as the cousin of Barnabas, but John Mark is not mentioned anywhere in the letters of the New Testament, namely Colossians, Timothy, Philemon, and Peter. There, Mark is mentioned. None of these, however, state that a person named Mark or this Mark mentioned in these verses wrote the gospel. The greatest argument in favor of Markan authorship is what we term as anonymity. This means that Mark was a relatively unknown figure in the New Testament world or in the first Christian community. And so it was very unlikely that a community which was so particular about apostolic authorship would say that Mark wrote the gospel if he did not actually write it. It would be more likely that they would attribute the authorship to Peter or James or some of the apostles who were known better than Mark. So anonymity is the greatest argument in favor of Markan authorship. Most regard Rome as the place in which the gospel was written, and this is largely because of the mention of persecutions within the gospel, the facing of those persecutions courageously, and how to respond to the persecutions. It seems to me the persecutions under Nero, when Nero was the emperor in Rome, because the eschatological discourse of Mark does not have the details of the other gospels, even of Matthew, which speaks about the temple having been burned to the ground. Most attribute Mark to before 70 CE. Why before 70 CE? Because the temple, the Jerusalem temple, was destroyed in 70 CE, and Mark's narrative about the destruction of the temple does not give us the details that Matthew gives. So it seems more likely that Matthew was written after the destruction of the temple because he had those details, but Mark was written before because Mark does not contain those details. In the structure that I proposed, I said it would be good to regard Mark in a chiastic manner, or Mark's structure is a chiasmus. And what does a chiasmus mean? A chiasmus structure or a chiastic structure means that the first in that structure corresponds with the last. In this case, desert begins the Gospel of Mark, which corresponds with tomb, which ends the Gospel of Mark. And in a chiasmus, the second corresponds with the second last. So the Galilee section corresponds with the Jerusalem section. The third corresponds with the third last, that is blindness and sight, corresponds with blindness and sight. And in a chiasmus, where there are 7 parts, the fourth part will be in the center. So here, the way, the hodos, the way of Jesus is in the center, because in the section of the way, Jesus speaks about his way of life. We move on now to the exegesis, or the interpretation. I would like you, if possible, to keep the text in front of you so you can both look at the text and ask any questions which might strike you even as you're reading the text. For those who might not be able, for whatever reason, to have the text in front of you, what I have done as a help is I have put down the text in front of you. The text which I will follow is the English translation, the New Revised Standard Version, the Anglicized Catholic Edition. This is the English version which I will follow, though I will mention a few Greek words also in between, those which are relevant. Also, in my presentation, I will follow the structure which I proposed, and therefore we notice right at the beginning, before we begin our interpretation, I have put down the heading, namely, in the desert, which you might remember began our structure of the Gospel of Mark, and the verses are chapter 1, verses 1 to 13. I will take these verses in segments or in small pericopes, which I think go together. Here, the first verse seems to be by itself, and that is why I have taken the first verse separately. Chapter 1, verse 1 of the Gospel of Mark begins in this manner. The beginning of the Evangelion, of the good news of Jesus Christ, Son of God. Now already there are many things which we note here and which we must note here before we can move on. And the first of these things is the beginning. The word arche. So Mark says that this is the beginning of his gospel. And so the question will arise, if this is the beginning, then when does the gospel end? And how long does this beginning last? These are questions which come into our mind immediately when we read the word beginning. Mark has spoken here about gospel. Now, the one thing we all must remember and keep in mind is this, that this word gospel, which comes from the Greek evangelion, could not definitely mean anything in writing. It cannot mean anything in writing because there were no gospels written before Mark, or even those who hold before Matthew. There were no gospels. So when the evangelist uses the word gospel, they are using it also in the Pauline sense, because you know that all of the gospels were written after all the letters of Paul were written. In other words, all the Pauline letters precede the gospel. And that is why the word gospel must not be understood in the sense of a written work, They must be understood in the sense of an oral proclamation. Now, it is the gospel about an individual, and that individual is named Jesus. Christ is not a surname. Christ, I will speak about a little later, is a title. It's not a surname. So Jesus, Yehoshua, Jesus is the name of this person whom Mark says it is the gospel. Jesus, according to Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, means God saves. That's all we can say. And Mark gives the title to this person, which is the English Christ, from the Greek Christos, and from the Hebrew Messiah. So Messiah, Hebrew, Christos, Greek, Christ in English, but Christ means anointed one. And according to Mark, this Jesus, Jesus, the anointed one, is the Son of God. And so a number of questions arise in our minds, namely, to what does the word beginning refer to? When Mark uses arche, what does he mean when he says arche? This arche can refer either to a particular moment in time that we call a temporal beginning, or it can refer to the narrative, to my story. I'm beginning my story now, and this is where I will end this introduction. So we might say the beginning may also be termed as an introduction. And so we need to ask, where does the introduction end? Does it end after the first verse? So some see the first sentence as an introduction to the scripture which Mark will quote in chapter 1, verses 2 to 3. Others see the introduction not so much as the scripture, but they see it in chapter 1, verses 14 to 15, where Jesus will come into Galilee and proclaim this good news, this evangelion. So because of the word, again, evangelion there, they think that up to verse 15 is the good news or the beginning of this good news. Still others think that the beginning does not end until chapter 16, verse 6, where the Neaniskos, the young man at the tomb, gives the women the message about what has happened. So we'll have to check and see which of these would we take for our understanding of beginning. The term gospel, evangelion, which is also mentioned later by Mark when Jesus comes proclaiming the good news here, it is the good news of Jesus Christ. There, it will be the good news of God. Also in chapter 8, verse 35, 10, 13, 14, the word gospel is used. What is important to note is this, that while the ordinary literal meaning of the word gospel is good news, this is how you would translate it in ordinary English, evangelion, gospel, good news, it will mean different things in the context in which it appears. And that is why here what Mark seems to be saying, that it is the good news about. So he's telling you a story about this Jesus, and this story, according to Mark, is good news. So here in this context, it is the gospel about Jesus. He is going to tell you something about the life of Jesus, something about the ministry of Jesus, something about the proclamation of Jesus. This is what it seems to us from here. And so the question is, who is this person? We don't know. In the chat, somebody asked me a question. Why does Mark not have an infancy narrative? A very simple answer would be because for Mark, the ministry of Jesus was more important than the antecedents. However, it does not mean that the question of the origin of Jesus was not important. As a matter of fact, it does have a great importance in the Gospel of Mark. When we look at chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, and we see there the antecedents of Jesus, that means where he has come from. When we see chapter 8, verses 27 to 30, the question which Jesus asked about his own identity, we notice that the antecedents are very important. Later in chapter 12, 35 to 37, when talking of David's son, even there, the antecedents are important. That is, the origin of Jesus is important. However, Mark possibly thought that for him, it was not necessary to write about the birth and where Jesus came from, except to write about it in contexts. So very clearly, in three contexts, 6, 1 to 6a, 8, 27 to 30, and later on in the gospel, namely 12, 35 to 37, three times we can speak about, you might say, stories about the birth or the infancy narrative, more correctly, the antecedents. So this is the reason why Mark did not have an infancy narrative. He did not think it necessary. Matthew and Luke possibly wanted to link, and you notice that both Matthew and Luke are very particular about giving genealogies. So their genealogies, more than the narrative or the story about the birth, will give you a bigger insight into the meaning of the birth of Jesus in Matthew and in Luke. Just like these three texts which I just now spoke about will give you a bigger insight. 6, 1 to 6a, 8, 27 to 30, and 12, 35 to 37 in the Gospel of Mark will give us a greater insight into the origin of Jesus or into the infancy narrative in the Gospel of Mark, if you like. Now, Jesus, we know nothing about Jesus yet. We only know that it is the good news of someone whom Mark calls Jesus, Yehoshua, Jesus in English. Now, when we look at Matthew 1:21, Matthew gives us what we may term as the etymology of the name Jesus. So Matthew says that the name Jesus is Savior, or more correctly, why would he be called Jesus? Because he will save his people from their sins. So this is the etymology or the meaning of the name according to Matthew. And that's why I put in brackets Matthew 1:21. So we can find out from Matthew, or we can understand that the name Jesus, so Mark seems to be talking about an individual whose name means God saves from sin. And Mark calls this person the Anointed One, the Messiah, the Christos, the Christ, the Anointed One. Now, the Anointed One was also a term referred to of kings. So kings were also anointed of God. Kings were also regarded as sons of God. So is this the same meaning? So does Mark, when he uses the word Christ here, mean that this Jesus is anointed in the same way as kings are anointed? Is this yet another king? And then when Mark gives the title Son of God, already at the beginning, while it might mean, yes, he is a king, it seems as we go later to through the gospel that it is a very special title. Later to the gospel, the references I have given are Mark 1:11, 9:7, and 15:39, 3 times besides this time, twice from the voice in heaven and once from a voice on earth, this title Son of God is used. Remember this? Jesus never uses the title Son of God about himself More often than not, Jesus uses the title Son of Man. As a matter of fact, the only time when Jesus will accept, not say himself, but will accept that he is Son of God is when the high priest questions him in 1461. This is the only time in the whole Gospel of Mark that Jesus will accept. He never says, I am Son of God. Demons say he's Son of God. Others say he's Son of God. But Jesus will never say it about himself. He often refers to himself as Son of Man. So as I said earlier on, the voice from heaven on 2 occasions, the centurion, and during his passion, he accepts it, and demons know. So Son of God, at this moment, we can only see this. We can say, namely, that Mark is writing a gospel about Jesus, who we know, whose name means God saves. And for Mark, this person is Christ and he's Son of God. But we cannot jump the gun and say, for Mark, he's a special person. No, at the moment, we only stay with this. So we have been introduced to a person who, for Mark, is not really an ordinary person, but he's slightly above ordinary, whether in the sense of extraordinary or just above ordinary, like a king, we are still not aware. Only when we move towards the forward will we become aware of what exactly this means. In the next 2 verses, and if you look at your new RSV text, you'll possibly find that there is a mention there, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. Now, this is what is known as text criticism. If you look in your new RSV, you'll find that there is an alphabet which is being placed above Isaiah the prophet. And the reason why this alphabet is placed there above the word prophet, for you to look down. When you look down at the notes which the new RSV would have given you, you will realize there it is said, other ancient authorities add the prophets. Now, what does this word or this phrase mean, other ancient authorities add the prophets? First, it means that it is something connected with text criticism. What does text criticism mean? And before that, what does a text mean? When the word text is used, which in your new RSV would be other ancient authorities, or the word text, when I use the word text, I mean it in the sense of manuscripts. I'm deliberately pronouncing it as manuscripts, even though the English pronunciation is manuscript, because manuscript means come from manus, the Latin hand, manus is hand, and script is writing. So writing with the hand. I would like to believe that you have been told when you did introduction to the New Testament that at this moment there are 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament available in libraries all over the world. 5,000. In other words, for study of the New Testament, the data is not rare, it's too much. Obviously, of these 5,000, it becomes very clear that through the carbon-14 dating process, we can find out that some of them are very late. That means 14th century, 15th century, 7th century, 8th century, and so on. However, there are many which are the 1st century. And now the question is, in the 1st century, there are manuscripts, so handwritten. We can talk about, for example, whether it was papyri, it was written on papyri, whether they are uncicles, whether they are minuscules. We can discuss all of that, which I would like to believe you have discussed already with your professors in text criticism. But very briefly to say, now what can we say when we can rate these 2 manuscripts which we have which are both saying different things, but they are very close in years. So we can say this possibly is about 100 CE. This possibly is 120. But more than that, we cannot really say. Now, there may be 2 or 3 or 4 manuscripts which are more or less the same age. In other words, we can say this seems to be 100, 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 and all of them are in the Gospel of Mark and this particular verse. So now you say, of these, which is the earliest? So while the carbon-14 dating process is an external process, an external scientific process to find out the age of a parchment, of a papyri, or of something which is written, text criticism is an internal way of finding out from 2 texts which seem to be written at a similar time, which of these is earlier. And now, I'm going to give you an example in text criticism. And what exactly is this example? I'm going to ask you to write down this sentence which you hear me say. I would like you to write down this sentence which you hear me say. And the sentence is this: to cite your references. To cite your references. Now, just that, those 4 words. How many words have I given you? I've given you 4 words. To cite, I repeat again. To cite your references. Everybody clear? Okay, now I'm going to have a poll. And the poll is where I'm going to give you 2 choices. I could have given you many more, but since I did not do it before, I'm going to launch this poll now. I'm going to launch this poll now, and I would like you to answer. I would like you to answer what you wrote. Okay? So let me launch this poll. This is the first course which I'm asking you, the first one. I'm going to give you only a few more seconds. This also gives me an idea of how many are there. Sometimes you fellows may put on your computer and you may not be around. Very good. Okay, okay. I'm going to share the results with you now. Let me just share the results with you of this one. Namely, there are 67%, 60 or 67 rather. So that means that showed me there are only 67 of you, because there's only one person who's not understanding. 67%, you can see the results. You can see the results. 67, that is almost 100%. Who say they are understanding the lectures. 1% says he or she is not understanding, and you can write to me privately. I would be very happy to try to understand you. Somebody is saying to cite. Very good, very good. So now, some of you can write in the chat how you have spelled cite. Please write, please write. There's nothing right or wrong about this. Very good, very good, very good, very good. Okay, so that'll give me an idea. That gives me an idea. Now, let me tell you what you have written and what you have possibly writing. There are some who are writing, for example, S-I-T-E. Some have written S-I-G-H-T. Others have written C-I-T-E. Now, supposing I were to call someone who knows the English language, and I were to ask that person, choose from these the earliest one, that person would not do it. What the person can do in such a case, he can choose the correct one. Are you understanding me? So please understand, in text criticism, what the text critic is trying to do is, out of two, which are both 100 CE, I am trying to find out which is earlier. I cannot find out because both seem to be 100. When I look at the text, when I read the text, then I can find out. Let me give you an example here. Now, supposing I were to tell you that there are two texts. One text of Mark says, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. Another text says, as it is written in the prophets. And I were to ask you, which of these, the first or the second, which of these would be the one which you think is earlier? Notice my words. The question is this. Supposing I were to say to the first one, the text which you have says to you, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. Another text you have got says, as it is written in the prophets. And I ask you, which of these? First is Isaiah, second is Isaiah the prophets. So tell me, first or second? Come on, let us see in the first or second. Second one, second one, second one. I'm talking about which is earlier. First one, that is Isaiah the prophet. Second one, you can't say. You can't say. Very good. One. Okay, very good. I'm getting an idea. Very good. Okay. So just to mention to you, every one of you who said, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, is earlier, not correct. I'm saying earlier are correct. Are you following me? In other words, you don't have to do much homework with regard to text criticism because the new RSV has already done the homework for you. What the new RSV has done is that the text which is earlier, please see, not the correct one, because Isaiah the prophet is a mistake. Why is it a mistake? Because this quotation which you see on your screen, behold, I send my messenger before thy face, who shall prepare thy way, is not from Isaiah. It is from Malachi. So in other words, let us say I am a scribe. I am a Christian and I am a scribe. I am copying down. I look at the text of Mark, which I have to copy. And I see that in the text, it says, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger. Now, when I look at the Old Testament or the First Testament, and I see there that nowhere has Isaiah said this statement, behold, I send my messenger before thy face, who shall prepare thy way. It is nowhere in Isaiah. It is only when I go to Malachi that I find it. So what am I going to do? I look at this text and I say, as it is written in Isaiah. When I am copying from this original text into my own, what I will instead say is, as it is written, and I'll change it, in the prophets. Now the wrong text, which was earlier, becomes the correct text. So that's why below your new RSB will have the correct text, and above, like in this case, they will have the earlier text in which there was a mistake. What I would like you to do now in the 10-minute break that you have, you will go through John chapter 7, verse 8. John chapter 7, verse 8. And from there, I would like you to look at the two texts which you see and see which of those is earlier. Later on, when you come back after the break, I will ask you the question, which of these is earlier? Please repeat the explanation of earlier. Okay, so the explanation of earlier is this, that there is a text where it is written, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. Now, I am a scribe. I am copying that text. So this is in front of me, the text as it is written in Isaiah. I'm copying, and as I say, as it is written, I wait. I say, written in Isaiah. I go through Isaiah, and I cannot find what this person is saying. It is not said in Isaiah, it is said in Malachi. The second part is said in Isaiah, but the first part is said in Malachi. So what will I do as a person copying? To correct the mistake, I will say, as it is written in the prophets. Or I will say, as it is written in Malachi and Isaiah. But to make it easy, what we have done, as it is written in the prophets. So this one, which said, as it is written in Isaiah, was earlier. It was a mistake, it was an error, which was corrected by a scribe writing later to as it is written in the prophets. A similar thing can be noticed in John chapter 7, verse 8. I would like you to do that for in this short time that you have as your break. Now, so we say that the first part here is from Malachi and the second part is from Isaiah. And so we try to understand what is the first part and what is the second part. Look there on the left-hand side, you notice, is Mark chapter 1, verses 2 to 3, which is actually from Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. What does God say in Malachi? I put that above, not in bold, because we are doing Mark. So Mark is in bold, but above. Notice, according to Malachi, God is speaking. By the way, Malachi means messenger. So God is speaking through Malachi, through the messenger. So what does God say? God says, I will send my messenger before me to prepare my way. Whose way? God's way. So God is going to send the messenger to prepare God's way. Now, what has Mark done? Mark has changed the pronoun. Mark has changed the pronoun. He seems to be having someone telling the one who is to come, I will send my messenger before you to prepare your way. So me has become you, and my way has become your way. So already here we notice that way is an important part as far as Mark is concerned. The next part, prepare in the desert a highway for our God, which in the text from Isaiah has become now, make his paths straight. So Mark has very, very creatively changed what was said about God in the Old Testament to make it applicable about Jesus in the New Testament. So the first two verses after the introductory verse indicate to us what exactly Mark is trying to say. So Mark blends also here Exodus chapter 23, verse 20. What you see in brackets is the Greek number 70, which is the way the Septuagint, that is the Greek translation of the First Testament, is known. So when there is a translation from the Greek First Testament, another First Testament is the Masoretic text. This is the Greek translation, not the Hebrew text, but the Greek translation is called the Septuagint. So therefore, this verse, chapter 1, verse 2, blends Exodus chapter 23, verse 20, and Malachi 3:1. So there's a combination, and the word hodos, or the word way, is already an important part. Matthew chapter 3 has only the quotation from Isaiah, but the quotation from Malachi much later. Luke also quotes Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. So all of them are speaking about the preparation of the way, but Luke does not quote Malachi. Luke quotes Malachi later. So the angel of Exodus is a reminder of wilderness, and that salvation will come from the wilderness, and also that God will bring out Jesus later from the wilderness. We stop here for now and continue